April 3rd, 2:14 a.m. Burlington. I pushed my own front door open, and it didn't let me in. The lock had been changed. My code no longer worked. On the door, pinned by a kitchen knife, hung an envelope. Under the trembling porch light, I read the printed notice, every word stark against the paper. Bank account frozen. Authorized by Mark Carter. Time, 1:47 a.m. For a moment, I simply stood there, the damp night pressing against my back. Then my phone rang, sharp, frantic, splitting the silence. The voice on the line was broken, trembling, barely recognizable. My daughter. "Mom, he hit me, and he told the police I attacked him. They believed him. They put me in holding. Please, come." My keys slipped from my hand and disappeared into a shallow puddle at my feet. The cold reached my chest first, then something deeper, a small, deliberate cracking inside me. How could they do this to me? How could my own family let this happen? If you want to hear my full story, you belong here. Now let me tell you who I am, and how all of this began. My name is Laura Bishop, and before that night on my porch, before the envelope pinned by a kitchen knife, before my daughter whispered through a cracked phone line, I was a woman people trusted. Or maybe they only trusted the things I could do for them. I'm still sorting out the difference. For 27 years, I served as a district judge and, before that, an attorney. My days were filled with careful arguments, neat stacks of motions, and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights above courtrooms where people swore to tell the truth and often didn't. I learned to read faces the same way other people read maps. I could hear hesitation in a single misplaced word. I could feel when a story leaned too heavily in one direction. Yet somehow, when it came to my own family, I let myself believe what I wanted to believe. Or what they wanted me to. They relied on me. My phone was never silent. "Mom, can you look over this lease?" "Laura, the closing date moved. Can you cover the last piece of the down payment? Could you talk to the dean? Could you co-sign just this once?" I was the one they called when jobs fell apart, when relationships cracked, when someone needed a lawyer and couldn't afford one. I paid for tuitions, for late car payments, for houses they said they deserved but couldn't quite manage. I did it because I could. I did it because I believed that giving made me useful, and being useful meant I would not be left behind. For a long time, that felt like pride. I had worked my entire life to stand on steady ground. I bought my own home, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. I kept paper copies of every bill I ever paid, filed by month, labeled in black ink. I believed in order, structure, and the quiet satisfaction of responsibility. And I believed I was building something solid for my children, Emily and Jason. Something they could lean on without fear. But pride has a strange way of souring when it's taken for granted one time too many. Emily, my youngest, inherited my quiet way of listening. She used to come over every Sunday morning with a box of croissants from the corner bakery and a jar of cinnamon jam she made herself. We'd sit at my kitchen table, the same one my husband and I bought the year we married, and she'd tell me about her art classes, her new projects, the small things that delighted her. She had a softness in her, like the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she talked about something she cared for. I saw myself in her, but I also saw the things I never allowed myself: gentleness, ease, a kind of unguarded hope. Jason, older by 4 years, was different. He was practical, impatient with emotions, and often in a hurry to get somewhere better. He built a career in tech, moved apartments more times than I could remember, and treated furniture like temporary companions. He never stayed long enough in one place to bother mounting shelves. Still, he called me for advice on contracts and taxes and anything that hinted of complication. "Mom," he'd say, "just tell me what to do." And I did. Every time. And then there was Mark, Emily's husband. He entered our family with a polished smile and a handshake that lingered a beat too long. At first, he seemed grateful for what we offered. He complimented my cooking, asked about my cases, held doors open like a man raised on manners. He brought wine to dinners and insisted on doing the dishes. For months, I believed he was simply nervous, eager to be welcomed in. I didn't want to imagine anything else. But looking back, I can see the small pauses in Emily's eyes when he tightened his arm around her shoulders. I can see how his compliments gradually turned into quiet corrections, the way he'd adjust her sleeve or move her hand or lower his voice when she laughed too loudly. At the time, I mistook it for clumsy affection. A new husband learning to navigate the tender corners of marriage. I told myself that all couples stumble as they find their rhythm. I didn't realize the rhythm he was teaching her was obedience. There were other signs, faint, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The shift in her wardrobe. The way she stopped wearing the soft yellow dress she loved because he once said the color made her look unserious. The way she began checking her phone during conversations, her eyes flicking down as if expecting a warning. The way she apologized too quickly, for things that didn't require apologizing. But my family had leaned on me for so long that I didn't know how to lean in return. I didn't want to seem suspicious or mistrustful. I didn't want Emily to think I doubted her choices. And so, I treated the small shadows like trivialities. Passing moods. Adjustments. I'd spent years in courtrooms untangling the worst things people could do to each other, and somehow I convinced myself that those horrors lived in files and transcripts, not across my own dining table. Still, something in me began to tighten, the way a drawer sticks when the wood swells with weather. A quiet resistance I didn't yet understand. Every time my daughter flinched when someone dropped a glass or spoke too sharply, I felt it. Every time Mark's hand closed around her elbow with a firmness that didn't match the moment, I felt it. Every time she told me, "Mom, everything's fine," in a tone too soft, too practiced, I felt it. And yet, I said nothing. Even a judge can choose silence when the truth feels too heavy. The night I found my door locked, with my accounts frozen under Mark Carter's authorization, that silence broke. But the truth had been walking toward me long before that moment, quiet, steady, patient. I just hadn't opened the door to it. Now you know who I was before everything shifted. A woman they trusted, a woman they leaned on, a woman they expected to stay steady no matter how uneven the ground became. And now, that pride I once carried so carefully tastes like something else entirely. Bitterness. A clean, unmistakable bitterness. Looking back, the first real crack didn't arrive with shouting or bruises or the kind of evidence a courtroom demands. It arrived quietly, over dinner, on an evening so ordinary I barely remember what I cooked. I only remember the way the light from the chandelier pooled across the table, turning the steam from the serving dishes into thin ribbons that drifted upward. Emily sat beside me, her hair pulled back with a blue silk tie she used to wear in college. Mark sat across from us, his fork tapping the plate in a small, impatient rhythm. We had gathered at my house for a simple family meal. It was early spring, almost exactly a year before the night everything came undone. The windows were open just enough to let in the smell of damp soil and early blossoms. Jason had canceled last minute, buried under work, so it was just the three of us. I remember thinking that maybe the quiet would be good for them, that they could relax without the usual buzz of a bigger gathering. Our waiter, because Mark had insisted on going out instead of eating at home, was a young man with a nervous smile and a habit of tucking the order pad into his back pocket. He refilled our water glasses without being asked and complimented Emily's earrings, a pair of small silver hoops she'd bought with her first real paycheck. She blushed lightly, the kind of gentle reaction she'd always had to simple kindness. When the waiter stepped away, Mark leaned in toward her, close enough that I could see the muscles in his jaw harden. His voice dropped to a whisper, but not low enough that I couldn't hear it. "If you look at the waiter like that again," he murmured, "we'll deal with it at home." The words sliced through the soft restaurant noise. I lifted my eyes, expecting to see a teasing smile, some sign that he was joking poorly. But his face remained still, his expression controlled in a way that didn't match the moment. Emily's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at me. She just stared down at her napkin, smoothing the crease with her fingertips. I cleared my throat. "Is everything all right?" Emily nodded too quickly. Fine, Mom. Just tired. Mark added, she gets sensitive when she hasn't slept. His tone was even, almost pleasant, but there was something calculated in it, as if he wanted me to hear concern instead of control. The waiter returned with our plates, breaking the tension. Emily folded her hands on her lap, her smile small but determined. For the rest of the dinner, she barely spoke. I tried to draw her out, asked about her latest painting, her new project, the upcoming gallery event, but she kept her answers short. It's going fine. I'm still working on it. Nothing big. Every reply felt rehearsed, like a version of herself she thought she needed to present. At the time, I tried to brush off Mark's whisper as a clumsy attempt at humor. Newlyweds sometimes stumble into awkward jokes, especially when they're trying to impress or assert themselves. I told myself not to overthink it. After all, I'd seen real cruelty in my courtroom, men who shouted, men who shoved, men who left visible marks. What I witnessed that night seemed small compared to the horrors I had documented in transcripts and testimonies. But as we stood outside the restaurant afterward, waiting for our cars, I noticed Emily rubbing her wrist as though soothing a bruise that wasn't there. The movement was faint, instinctive. When headlights swept across the parking lot, she flinched slightly at the sudden brightness. I asked again, quietly this time, "Are you sure you're all right?" She forced a smile. "Of course, Mom." Mark placed a hand on her back, guiding her toward their car. His touch looked gentle, but Emily's body stiffened beneath it. It was brief, so brief I might have missed it if I weren't watching her so closely. She climbed into the passenger seat, shutting the door with a soft click. Mark looked at me across the roof of the car, his expression unreadable. "Thanks for dinner," he said. The words were polite, but something in them felt hollow. A practiced thank you, not a sincere one. When they drove away, I stood in the cool night air longer than necessary, listening to the distant sound of their engine fading down the street. A quiet unease settled over me, the kind that builds slowly rather than striking all at once. I didn't yet have proof of anything. Just a feeling, one I wasn't ready to name. Still, that whisper at the restaurant lodged itself in my mind like a small, unwelcome seed. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining shadows where there were none. I told myself that couples have tensions, that I shouldn't interfere. But now, when I look back, I understand something important. A first crack doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It simply appears, one sharp, quiet line across the surface of something you thought was whole. And that night, I saw the first line. I just didn't yet understand how deep it would run. After that dinner, small changes began to collect around Emily the way dust gathers in corners, easy to ignore individually, harder to dismiss once you notice the shape they form. At first, I tried not to interfere. I told myself she was newly married, adjusting to shared routines, learning compromise. But the truth was quieter and more persistent. Something in her life had shifted, and she no longer moved through the world with ease. The first sign arrived in her clothes. Emily had always loved soft fabrics and warm colors, linen skirts, loose sweaters, dresses with pockets big enough to hold her paintbrushes. She dressed like someone who valued comfort and expression over trend. But slowly, those pieces disappeared. When she came to visit, she wore fitted black slacks, crisp button-downs, and neutral tones that seemed chosen not by preference but by requirement. When I asked if she still had the yellow dress she adored, she hesitated before answering, "I outgrew it." The lie was gentle, but unmistakable. Then our weekly mom-daughter coffee faded without warning. It had been our ritual for years, Saturday morning, 9:30, the corner cafe with the chipped blue mugs. We never missed it unless one of us was traveling or ill. But one weekend, she canceled. "Mark made plans," she said. The next weekend, she didn't mention it at all. And by the third weekend, when I asked if she wanted to meet, the reply came not from her, but from Mark, "She's busy. Don't bother her." The words were curt, sent at 9:32 a.m., the exact minute she would normally be walking through the cafe door. I stared at the message longer than necessary, trying to decide whether to respond. In the end, I didn't. Something about the phrasing felt intentional, as if he wanted to position himself between us. Family gatherings became another battleground of subtle shifts. At my house, where laughter once rose easily over the hum of the fridge and the clinking of dishes, Emily now stayed close to Mark's side. His hand hovered constantly at her elbow or lower back, guiding her from room to room. If she drifted too far during conversation, he would appear beside her, a gentle but insistent shepherd. When she laughed, which had always been light and unguarded, he would lean in and whisper something I couldn't hear. Whatever he said, it dimmed her laughter every time. Once, during a holiday dinner, Jason told a harmless story about Emily's disastrous attempt to bake bread when she was 12. It was a family joke, retold countless times. Emily smiled at first, but when the table erupted in laughter, Mark placed a hand on her knee under the table. His grip was firm enough that she jolted, then fell silent. I watched her swallow hard, her eyes fixed on her plate. When I touched her shoulder later while clearing dishes, she flinched, not dramatically, but enough that I felt it in my palm like a small electric current. She recovered quickly, offering a strained smile. "Sorry, Mom. Just tired." She said it so often that the phrase began to lose all meaning. At night, I started replaying these moments while sitting alone in my kitchen. The scent of lavender dish soap lingered in the air. The refrigerator hummed steadily. I would rest my fingertips on the cool surface of my mug, tracing the chipped rim absently. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. That newlywed sometimes closed ranks. That maybe I wasn't giving Mark a fair chance. But then the warnings grew sharper. Once, I called Emily on a Tuesday afternoon, just to check in. I heard rustling on the other end, then silence. Finally, Mark answered. "She can't talk right now," he said. No apology. No explanation. Just a flat dismissal. When I asked if everything was all right, he sighed. "She's overwhelmed. You calling like this doesn't help." Before I could respond, the line went dead. Another time, Emily canceled a family brunch an hour before it started. The message was simple: not feeling well. But when I called Jason later, he said he had seen a picture Mark posted on social media that morning, a hiking trail, sunlight cutting through trees, Emily's silhouette in the background. She hadn't looked sick at all. She had looked distant, as though she were following rather than participating. The hardest moment came one evening when she arrived at my house alone, just for a minute, to drop off a scarf she had borrowed. She stood in the doorway, purse clutched to her chest, eyes darting toward the driveway even though no one was there. Her right sleeve was pulled down awkwardly, covering more of her wrist than necessary. I reached to brush a strand of hair from her face, and she flinched again. This time, she didn't hide it fast enough. "Emily," I whispered, "what's happening?" She shook her head. "Nothing. Really, Mom. I'm fine." But her voice trembled, and her smile held nothing but exhaustion. Before I could ask more, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and went pale. "I have to go," she said. And she was gone, down the steps, into her car, pulling away before I even closed the door. That night, as the clock read 11:47 p.m., I stood in the hallway outside my bedroom, hands resting on the wooden banister worn smooth over decades. I felt a heaviness settle over me, a deep, unmistakable certainty that something was wrong. Not small wrong. Not newlywed adjustment wrong. Something darker. Something calculated. But I also felt something else: shame. Shame for not seeing the truth earlier. I had spent my life reading people, reading danger, reading patterns. And yet, in my own family, I had ignored the quiet alarms. I didn't yet know the full extent of what Emily was enduring. But I knew, finally, that the shadows weren't imagined. They were real. They were growing. And they were moving toward us faster than I wanted to admit. I used to believe the worst nights announced themselves. That there would be a warning, an argument, a slammed door, a feeling in the air that told you to brace. But the night everything collided began like any other, quiet, almost dull. Rain tapped against my kitchen window on April 3rd while I washed the last of the dishes, lavender soap on my hands. The clock above the stove read 11:08 p.m. I remember because I dried my fingers on a towel and thought, Emily should be home by now. We had exchanged only one text that day. At 3:17 p.m. I wrote, "How are you holding up?" She replied at 3:19, "Busy. I'll call tonight." No heart, no flourish, just those 4 words. I treated them like a promise. By midnight, my phone was still silent. I made tea I didn't drink, walking from room to room with the mug in my hand. When the call finally came, it wasn't from Emily. At 1:06 a.m., my screen lit with an unfamiliar Burlington number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me refused. I answered. "Mrs. Bishop," a male voice asked. "This is Officer Ramirez with the Burlington Police Department. Are you the mother of Emily Carter?" My body went still. "Yes. Is she all right?" He paused, a beat too long. "Your daughter is here at the station. There was a domestic incident at her residence. She has been detained." The word settled on my chest. Detained? For what? "Aggravated assault," he said. For a moment, I heard nothing but the refrigerator humming and the rain against the glass. "That's not possible," I said, my voice low, even. "There must be a mistake." "Ma'am, I understand this is difficult," he replied, sliding into a practiced calm. "Her husband has provided a statement. If you come down to the station, we can discuss further." Years in court had taught me that panic wastes time. I said, "I'll be there in 15 minutes, hung up, and moved. Coat from the hook. Keys from the ceramic bowl. Phone in my pocket. When I stepped onto the porch, the rain hit me in a cold sheet. I locked the door behind me, not knowing how much would unravel before I saw that lock again. The drive to the precinct blurred into wet pavement and streetlights. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my mind ran every possibility, a misunderstanding, an accident, some error. Emily, my cautious child, charged with assault? Unthinkable. Inside the precinct, the air smelled of old coffee. A fluorescent light buzzed above the front desk. I stated my name, my former position, my relationship to Emily. The desk officer straightened. He handed me a thin file. "Your daughter's case packet, ma'am." On the top page, I read. Aggravated assault. Suspect, Emily Carter. Complainant, Mark Carter. Victim statement signed, 1:52 a.m. Below, Mark's typed narrative. According to him, Emily had become enraged, grabbed a kitchen knife, and lunged at him. He wrote that she had a history of emotional instability, that he feared for his life, that he had no choice but to defend himself and call police. Cold clarity settled over me, the same clarity I had used to dissect lies on the stand. The language was polished, careful, built like a story prepared in advance. This was not the messy panic of a frightened spouse. This was strategy. "Where is she?" I asked. The officer led me down a hallway of scuffed gray walls. We stopped near a wide interior window. On the other side, under flat light, sat my daughter. Emily's hair was pulled back in a loose knot. A bruise darkened her jaw. I saw the edge of a burn on her shoulder where her shirt had torn. Her hands were folded in her lap, knuckles white. When she saw me, her eyes filled with relief and shame. They brought us into a small interview room, gray table, 2 chairs. When the door closed, her composure cracked. "Mom," she whispered, voice hoarse. I only tried to cover my face. He grabbed my arm, dragged me against the stove. I never touched him with the knife. He took it. He said he'd cut himself and tell them I did it. Every word lodged inside me. I had heard victims describe scenes like this for years, doubting themselves because the paperwork told a different story. Now it was my daughter speaking in that same, shaking rhythm. "They believed him," she said. "They put me in holding. They said the marks on him matched his story." I looked at the red imprint on her wrist, the bruise at her jaw, the burn on her shoulder. I imagined Mark in their kitchen, choosing where to cut himself, how convincing to make it, rehearsing his lines. In that moment, the ground beneath my feet shifted. Not like an earthquake, sudden and loud, but like a slide of earth giving way. This was no misunderstanding. This was a narrative, built and executed. And as I held her gaze across that metal table, I understood something with brutal certainty. Mark had not only hurt her. He had tried to weaponize the system I had devoted my life to uphold. I have stood in many rooms that hummed with tension. Courtrooms just before a verdict. Mediation chambers where people clutched folders like shields. Interview rooms where a single sentence could tip a life in one direction or another. But sitting across from my own daughter in that small gray room, with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant lingering in the air, I felt a different kind of weight pressed down on my chest. Emily's shoulders were shaking with each breath. Her eyes were still swollen from crying, but beneath the fear, I saw something else beginning to form, a thin, fragile thread of hope that I would know what to do. That I would make this right. For a heartbeat, I almost reached for the same old reassurances. "It will be fine. We'll clear this up. Just tell the truth and the truth will protect you." Those were lines I had given to so many people over the years. Tonight, I couldn't say them. I listened instead. She told me, haltingly, what had led to the moment in the kitchen. The argument about money. The accusations about her disrespect. The way he had grabbed her phone and scrolled through her messages, demanding to know why she had texted Jason earlier in the week. The way he had blocked the doorway when she tried to leave the room. How his voice had gone very, very quiet before he reached for the drawer where they kept the knives. "I didn't even see it at first," she whispered. "He moved so fast. He shoved me back against the stove. I smelled the burner. I just tried to cover my face." Her hand drifted to the burn on her shoulder, fingers hovering above the damaged skin without touching it. I thought of the photographs I had seen in evidence files, the charts and diagrams, the careful medical descriptions that once allowed me to stay detached. There was no detachment here. Only my daughter, hurt and humiliated, sitting in a chair that had held too many stories like hers. "He said no one would believe me," she continued. "He said if I ever tried to leave, he'd make sure I was the one who went to jail. That everyone would think I was crazy, unstable, violent. When the officers came, he already had his story. He showed them where he cut himself. He told them I snapped. And when I tried to speak, they told me to calm down or they'd add resisting." Her voice broke on the last word. I let the silence stretch between us, not as a punishment, but as a necessary space where the truth could settle. My whole life, I had trained myself to separate emotion from analysis. Facts first, feelings later. But in that moment, they came together in a single, sharp line. This system, the one I had served, defended, believed in, had been turned into a weapon against my child. I drew in a slow breath and wiped the dampness from my cheeks with the back of my hand. Reached for my purse, more out of habit than anything else. My fingers brushed the cool metal of my old courthouse keychain, long since retired but still attached to my house keys. It felt heavier than it should have. I closed the purse gently and folded my hands on the table. "Emily," I said, keeping my voice steady, "listen to me." She lifted her head, eyes searching my face as if trying to read a verdict there before I spoke it. "This is the last night he will ever hurt you." The words surprised even me with how calm they sounded. There was no heat in them, no dramatic flourish. Just a simple, unshakable statement of fact. The same tone I had used on the bench when I announced decisions that would not be overturned. I saw something flicker in her expression, disbelief, then wary relief, then a fragile beginning of trust. "How?" she whispered. He's already ahead of us. He took everything. He froze your account, Mom. He said you'd lose everything if you tried to help me. There it was, another shard of the truth. The envelope on my door. The notice pinned with a kitchen knife. Mark had not only prepared a story for the police, he had positioned himself to control the aftermath. In his mind, this was already a closed case. He had forgotten who I was. He won't win, I said quietly. Not this time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't promise miracles. I simply laid out the reality as I saw it, piece by piece, the way I used to do when I summarized a case. He built a narrative, I continued. But narratives leave traces. Timelines. Inconsistencies. Digital footprints. Financial records. Communications. He used the system, yes, but that means he left evidence every step of the way. We will find it. We will use it. And we will make sure the right story is the one that stands. As I spoke, the fear inside me did not disappear, but it changed shape. It became something colder, sharper, more focused. A tool rather than a weight. I felt my breathing slow, my thoughts arrange themselves in clean, precise lines. All those years in court had sharpened muscles I thought I had put away when I retired. In that cramped room, they woke up. For the first time that night, I felt more than despair. I felt resolve. Emily's hands unclenched slowly. She wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve like a child, and for a moment I saw her as she had been at 8 years old, standing in our kitchen after dropping a glass, convinced I would be angry. Back then, I had simply handed her a broom and shown her how to sweep the pieces safely. We would do the same now, I decided. Sweep the shards, piece by piece. Examine them. Use them. Outside the door, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Voices murmured. The world beyond this room kept moving, oblivious. Inside, something fundamental in me settled into place. I was no longer just a mother reacting to a crisis. I was what I had always been at my core, a woman who understood how to take a broken story apart and rebuild it with the truth. And this time, it was personal. In that moment fear eased and so path ahead came into focus. The moment I stepped out of that interview room, something in me clicked into place, not loudly, not with fury, but with a deliberate finality, like the soft turn of a deadbolt. The precinct hallway smelled faintly of damp jackets and printer ink. Officers moved around me, absorbed in their duties, unaware that the ground had shifted beneath my feet. My daughter sat bruised behind a glass wall, and her husband believed he had her cornered. He believed he had me cornered too. He was wrong. I stood near the vending machine, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. "It's Laura," I said when my former colleague answered. My voice didn't tremble. "I need you to listen carefully." He inhaled sharply when I explained the situation. He falsified the statement. He constructed it, I corrected. Precisely. And I need access to the digital submission logs, the time-stamped entries, the officer notes, everything. "I can't promise all of it," he said. "But I'll pull what I can." "You'll get it," I replied, not as a threat, but as a fact. "I'll be there within the hour." Next, I called a federal contact who owed me a favor from a trafficking case 15 years ago. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "What's the matter?" "I'm dealing with a domestic manipulation scenario with fraudulent evidence. I need access to sealed financial activity tied to my daughter's husband." A low whistle came through the line. "That's a tight box to pry open." "I don't need the box," I said. "Only the lid." He chuckled softly. "Send me his full name." I typed, Mark Andrew Carter. Dilby, July 12, 1986. Then I called Jason. My son answered on the second ring, voice sharp with sleep. "Mom? It's 2:30. What's happening?" "I need you to go to the attic," I said. "There's a Navy storage bin labeled Emily, School. Inside it is a floral photo album from when she was 9. Bring it to the precinct. Right now. Why? What does? Jason, I said gently but firmly, trust me. There was a pause. I'm on my way. I hung up and exhaled slowly. The fluorescent lights above me flickered once, humming their low electric tune. I watched the rain slide down the glass door of the lobby in thin, silver streaks. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. The night felt stretched, as though holding its breath. When Jason arrived 40 minutes later, he carried the old photo album under his arm. The edges were frayed, the cover smelled faintly of cedar from years in storage. He placed it on the metal table in the consultation room. Mom, he said, what exactly are we doing with her third-grade scrapbook? I opened the album, turning pages with practiced care. Photos curled slightly at the corners, Emily with her missing front tooth, Emily holding a fishing pole twice her size, Emily painting a cardboard castle in our backyard. Near the back was the pocket where she used to hide small treasures, dried flowers, ticket stubs, handwritten notes folded to the size of stamps. And the recorder. Emily had bought it with allowance money when she was 14. She used it to practice lines for a school play. Later, she tucked it into that album and forgot about it. But I remembered. I had put new batteries in it once when she asked for help. Something about the weight of it had stayed with me. I slid the recorder from the pocket. Jason blinked. You can't be serious. That thing still works. It will, I said. I pressed play. At first, only static filled the air. A faint hiss, like distant wind. Then a voice, Emily's. Shaky. Apologizing for something small. A dropped mug, maybe. Then another voice layered over hers. Mark's. The first recording caught his scolding, the tone sharp enough to cut. The second held more, a dull thud, a muffled sob, his quiet, venomous whisper. If you ever embarrass me again, I swear I'll make it look like you attacked me. Jason's face drained of color. I didn't stop the playback. The third recording sealed everything, Mark saying, calm and assured, I'll cut my own arm if I have to. You'll go to jail before anyone even asks what happened. You'll never prove anything. Never. I pressed the stop button. The silence that followed felt heavier than the recordings themselves. Jason leaned back, stunned. Mom, this is enough to bury him. No, I said softly. This is enough to start. I had the officer make a digital copy, time-stamped and logged. My colleague sent over the case file inconsistencies within the hour. Mark had submitted his statement before the 911 call timestamp, a detail he had overlooked. My federal contact texted, unusual financial activity. Funds moved from joint account to private card under false vendor name. We'll send full report. Piece by piece, the story Mark built began to fracture. His mask, polished and confident, showed cracks everywhere. I walked back to the room where Emily waited. She looked small, wrapped in a thin blanket they had provided, fingers knotted together. When I sat beside her, she asked in a whisper, Mom, are we losing? I shook my head. Not anymore. She stared at me, searching for the truth behind the words. The system believes the first good storyteller, I said gently. But tonight, we're taking back the narrative. Outside the precinct, the rain eased into a slow drizzle. Dawn was still hours away. But for the first time all night, I felt the faintest shift in the air, a turning, subtle but real. We had evidence. We had witnesses. We had the first threads of the truth pulled loose from the lies. And I had my daughter's hand in mine. This was where the fight truly began. Morning reached the precinct as a pale stripe along the far wall. I had not slept, but my mind felt clear. The recordings, the logs, the bank transfers, each lay in a neat row in my thoughts. Mark had built himself a story. I now held its loose threads. He arrived just after 7. From a chair near the front, I watched him come through the doors, jacket over yesterday's shirt, hair combed, expression carefully strained. Anyone else might have seen a worried husband. I saw a man who still believed he could manage the narrative. He walked to the desk. "My wife, Emily Carter, was brought in last night," he said. "She's unstable. I'm very concerned about her condition." When the officer gestured toward a waiting area, I stood. "Good morning, Mark," I said. He turned. For a heartbeat his face went blank. Then he smiled. "Laura. Thank God you're here. She needs help." This whole thing got out of hand. I let him talk. He used the same words from his statement: emotional, volatile, unpredictable. Then I handed the supervising officer a small flash drive. "This should be added to the file," I said. "It contains Mr. Carter describing how he will cut himself and claim my daughter attacked him. Several recordings, over several days." Mark's hand tightened on the folder he was carrying. "That's a violation of my privacy," he snapped. "In this state," I replied, "one person's consent is enough." The atmosphere changed. My former colleague arrived with logs showing his statement had been opened before the emergency call. A financial report followed with transactions. Money moved quietly from Emily's account into a business only Mark controlled. The officer's questions shifted. His certainty began to fray. They took him into an interview room and pressed play. Through the narrow glass, I watched his posture. At first he leaned back, ankle over knee. Then his own voice filled the space. "I'll cut my own arm and you'll go to jail. You'll never prove anything." His shoulders dropped. When they set the account records in front of him, he tried denial, then sudden anger. None of it altered the timestamps, the numbers, or the sound of his threats. The arrest itself was quiet. An officer read him his rights. Another closed the cuffs around his wrists with a small metallic click. Mark looked toward the hallway, searching for me. I kept my attention on Emily instead. She stood in a sweatshirt, watching as the man who had framed her was led away. By midday, the outside world reacted. His firm was notified of the charges and placed him on leave. A client canceled a contract. The image he'd polished for years, photos of charity races, posts about family first, suddenly rang hollow. His family called that evening. "Laura," his mother said, voice tight, "he's under so much pressure. This isn't who he really is. Can't we handle this privately?" "No," I said. "He made public choices. They have public consequences." His sister sent a message begging for forgiveness, asking me not to destroy his life over one terrible night. I answered with one line: "He spent many nights preparing this." Even Jason struggled. He sat at my kitchen table, turning his mug by the handle. "I liked him at first," he admitted. "I thought he pushed Emily to be more confident. I didn't look closer." "You see clearly now," I told him. "Let that lesson stay with you." I did not celebrate. Instead, I answered investigators' questions and signed forms that unwound what he had done, reversing transfers, updating access, removing his name where it never should have been. I accompanied Emily as she reset passwords and registered things in her own name. Piece by piece, the scaffolding he had built around himself fell away. For years, he'd kept my daughter standing over a trapdoor only he controlled. Now he was the one discovering how it feels when the floor finally gives way, and nothing beneath it belongs to him anymore. The house was quiet the first morning after Mark's arrest. Not the heavy, waiting quiet of worry, but a different kind, like a room that has finally been aired out. The kitchen felt unfamiliar again. For the first time in months, I did not wake with my heart racing, wondering what he might be doing to her while I slept. Instead, I woke to a message from Emily. "Can we get some air today?" she wrote. "Just you and me." By afternoon we were driving toward the lake, the same one we had visited when the children were small. Now Emily sat in the passenger seat with a blanket folded in her lap, the faint outline of healing bruises along her jaw. She watched the trees slide past the window, branches still bare but tipped with new buds. She was not free yet. There were hearings ahead, rooms where strangers would ask her to break her story into pieces. But the most dangerous part was over. He could not reach her that day. For the moment, that was enough. We found a small cottage overlooking the water, a place that had once been a summer rental. The owner, a widower in his 70s, agreed to lease it to Emily month by month. "It's quiet," he told her. "Good for starting over." The porch sagged slightly, but the boards were solid. Inside, the air smelled of wood and dust. When we opened the windows, cold air rushed in with the scent of lake water. "This could work," she said. We spent that first day sweeping, wiping down counters, stacking dishes in cupboards. Each simple task felt like a statement: this space is mine. At a thrift store we found a narrow bed, an armchair with worn arms, a table sturdy enough for canvases and brushes. She chose a soft green rug for the living room. Watching her decide, I realized how long it had been since she chose anything without glancing at someone else first. That evening, I made cinnamon tea on the small stove while she sat on the porch steps, wrapped in the blanket. The lake lay in front of us, flat and pale in the fading light. "Do you think I was foolish?" she asked quietly. "For staying so long?" "I think you were hopeful," I said. "Hope is not foolish. But you don't owe your hope to anyone who uses it against you." She nodded, eyes on the water. "I keep remembering the good days," she said. "Now they feel expensive. Like I paid for them with pieces of myself." "You did," I said. "And you don't have to pay anymore." We sat together without speaking for a while. The air grew colder. I felt the solid weight of the mug in my hands, the familiar scent of cinnamon rising with the steam. It reminded me of our old Sunday mornings, before her world narrowed to the size of his moods. Now the world was opening again, not with miracles, but with small permissions. She could leave a mug in the sink without fear. She could laugh without checking anyone's face. She could fall asleep without listening for footsteps in the hall. As for me, I began to discover a new kind of quiet. Not the silence of being shut out, but the stillness that comes after a storm when you finally believe it has passed. I walked the lake path in the evenings, feeling the gravel under my shoes. Sometimes Emily joined me. Sometimes she stayed behind to paint, windows open, music low. We did not talk much about Mark in those first weeks. There would be time for that in courtrooms and offices. Instead, we talked about practical things: how to change her mailing address, how to set up her own account again, how to build a calendar that belonged only to her. Piece by piece, she reclaimed her days. One Saturday, I arrived to find a new canvas by the window. It showed the lake at dawn, a single streak of pale gold along the horizon. "It's not finished," she said. "I know," I replied. "Neither are we." In that cottage by the water, with chipped mugs and second-hand chairs, we were not magically healed. We were simply living. For the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I've learned something I once told others but never truly understood myself: justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's a mother answering the phone in the dark, steadying her voice while the world tilts. Sometimes it's choosing not to look away when the truth hurts. These days, I'm no longer afraid of silence. I sit beside my daughter on her small lake porch, listening to the water move in slow waves. She paints. I read. Our breaths fall into the same gentle rhythm. If the night ever comes again with fear at its edges, I know what I will say. I will say it the way I said it in that gray interview room, with calm certainty born from love and hard-earned clarity. Not tonight. Not with my family. If this touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength.